Hello, and thank you for joining us, guys. I'm so glad that you're here. Go ahead and say hi down in the chat if you haven't already. Like the stream if you haven't. We've got a really great guest for you today, a personal friend of mine, and I'm really excited to bring him with you. Couple quick housekeeping things before we get started. Usually, I like to promote our merch when at the Lucretia Report store at the beginning of this. I'm not going to do that today. Today, instead, I'm going to promote two things. I'm going to promote, first of all, just subscribing to the channel. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. We're getting close to 2,000 subscribers, and when we get to that, we can join the service that helps us get sponsors, so that'll be really big for the channel. So if you know anyone who hasn't subscribed yet, who's into politics, who you think might be into this, go ahead and show them the channel. We just launched a new trailer that you can have them check out. And the other thing I want to plug today is our Patreon. I always plug our merch, but another great way you can support us is on our Patreon at patreon.com/Lucretia Reports. We just added a whole bunch of new stuff, and there's all kinds of benefits on there, so that's awesome. And also, on Tuesday, we've got the first presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and I'm going to be streaming that with several other content creators. We've got the 805 Uncensored podcast. We've got Sylvia from Tono Latino, who we actually interviewed in a previous stream. And we've got Americans for Decency, who we've collaborated with in the past on this channel, but on their channel. And the four of us are going to be doing a live commentary and fact check of the first presidential debate. That's Tuesday at 9 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 p.m. Central Time, and I guess that would be 6 p.m. Pacific Time, right? So be sure to tune in for that. You can go ahead, if you're on a desktop, you can open up a new slide, and open it there, and you can hit for YouTube to give you a reminder. It's also in the link of the description of this. There's a link, and be sure to tune into that. So, without further ado, our guest today, he's a justice of the peace in Denton County, Texas. It's one of those kind of positions that people don't think about a lot, but it's does a lot every day that affects people's normal lives, a lot more than a congressman or a senator might on a day-to-day basis. He was also the only Democrat in Denton County to win an election in 2018, so maybe he can give us some insight on how Democrats can win in Texas and other swing states like that. I'd like to introduce you to Chris Lopez.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me.
How you doing?
Participate. I'm doing well.
Good. So we were just talking before the stream started about how you've been having to do court lately, and that was a little interesting. So before we get into everything, why don't you tell people what you just told me?
So it's exactly what we're doing here now. We're sitting here on Zoom, and you're streaming on a couple different platforms. What we do is we open Zoom, send out hearing notification letters in advance so that everybody can either download it, practice calling in. I start Zoom as soon as court is supposed to start, and then we spend the next 10, 15 minutes checking people in, which is really, can you hear me? Is my audio working? Is your microphone working? Try this. And then once court starts, we start streaming on YouTube Live. It is actually something we have to do. It's mandated by the state to do court right now. So obviously COVID, we can't have people into the courtroom because it's impossible to get more than 6 people in my courtroom and maintain social distance safely. So nobody's allowed into the courtroom. So everything is going to be done through Zoom, through phone, which means they can call in. We can get them audio working that way. And then YouTube Live is the main choice because it's user friendly, super easy for a judge to figure out how to hit play, hit stream. Because at the end of the day, we're an open court, meaning if anybody wanted to visit the JP court, as long as it's on the docket and the court is in session, you could check in with security. Have a seat in just the general section, watch court. You don't have to identify yourself. Don't need to say why you're there. You're just a member of the public observing. So when I hit that start YouTube Live, I go into very similar to what you do, is just a couple house cleaning checks. I make a couple basic announcements I'll introduce myself. I'm Christopher Lopez. I'm the judge of Denton County Justice of the Peace Precinct 6. I thank them for exercising their right and viewing open court. And then I go into the rules that we have to follow. And so in open court, is a little different because people want to take screenshots. They want to take, take notes of everything. which it's their right to take notes, but we're not a court of record, so I have to make sure and tell them they can't take pictures, they can't record proceedings, they can't write down everything we say, but they can, of course, take notes. And we have that little disclaimer in the bottom right-hand corner of our court screen for YouTube Live. And then I just tell everybody on Zoom the exact same policy. It gets a little bit tricky just because audio fail, internet fails. Last week, a construction crew cut our fiber optic cable and our entire building went down. So we had to reset every case, but because it's 2020, I just opened Zoom on my phone and had to tell everybody as they checked in, we're resetting because I can only do this on my phone, and that's not going to do YouTube Live at the same time. So we had,
Yeah, that's okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead. I was just gonna say that's really emblematic of what I think this whole year has been. Almost like we're behaving just enough like normal that people don't constantly feel it, but then sometimes you really, really feel it. Um, I can still hear you. I'm going to try to get rid of this cursor that's running around on the screen real quick, so you guys are going to see something pop up, but we can keep talking while I do that. Why don't you go ahead. I always like to start with a little introduction, so why don't you go ahead and tell everyone a little bit about who you are, and then because people may not always, may not understand what a justice of the peace does or what you do, can you explain what your role is?
Absolutely. So, as justice of the peace, we're an elected position. Most people don't really know that their judges are elected. Um, Especially here in Texas, when you look at the ballot, you'll just see one judge running, oftentimes, many times unopposed. But it's an elected position. JP is every 4 years. Um, and then when I was elected, it was a unique scenario in that I was on the ballot at 32, sworn into office as the youngest elected official in Denton County, first Democrat judge in 20 years, first Democrat to win a seat. No, I'm sorry. First Democrat judge in 30 years, first Democrat elected in Denton County in 20 years. So there was a lot of changes going through our whole area. But back to what a JP does, Texas is a pretty big state, and so they gave us this broad range of powers. But then slowly over time, depending on where a JP is, they might take some of those duties away from the JP, assign them to other departments, and so that they can continue with their cases. So when people hear JP, they think, oh, they do weddings, they go to death scenes and pronounce people dead. Some JPs do that. Those are usually the smaller counties. Denton County is a large city, a large county, and so they have to have a coroner go out and do that. And so that's one duty that I don't have to do. Luckily, is I don't have to wake up at 1 a.m. go to a death scene. But throughout the state, what we're known for is, of course, as I just said, weddings. Um, Primarily, I'm overseeing eviction court because that's the largest part of my docket here. Small claims court debt claims are very, very similar, but they're both capped at $20,000, and that just changed. For a solid decade, it was 10,000, but as of September 1st, we now have jurisdiction over $20,000 limits in our court, which means if somebody filed on, a month and a half ago and it was $12,000, if I hear the case tomorrow, I don't have jurisdiction over it because I filed it too early. So we're reviewing all of those little processes. And then another aspect that is almost like the hidden side of what a JP does, we have these things called administrative hearings, meaning if you lose your driver's license because it's suspended by the state, you could petition the appropriate JP court and we can review it. And if we find reason to give you a license, we can grant you an occupational driver's license. That has been one of the most rewarding aspects because people don't know how to do it. They get nervous when they do have these court hearings for occupational licenses. But more often than not, you're giving somebody a driver's license who hasn't been able to obtain one in 5, 10 years.
So is that like if someone needs, I'm assuming from the name occupational, is that like if someone needs to drive for their job, but they've had a license suspended?
Exactly. It's very, very situational, and it's only used for, as you just said, work, going to and from work or school, essential duties. That's the kind of the key aspect, medical appointments, attorneys if needed. Not a valid license to go hang out with your friends across town or go to the gym. It doesn't really count for that one. The real tough part about that one is it used to be geared more towards people who had a lot of surcharges on their record. Thankfully, Texas got rid of surcharges. One example, I saw one person bring in 5 sheets, and every line was a surcharge. And at a glance, he's paid over $10,000 in surcharge fees. Those are now wiped off. Nobody has to pay those anymore, except for very rare cases.
Mhm.
But when they're canceled for that reason, that's most of what we did for granting licenses. But it could also be done for alcohol violations, drug violations, as long as there's not a conviction yet. And so we review those as well.
Mhm. Yeah, well, sorry, first of all, I don't know why the cursor's not going away, so I'm just going to try to keep that away from my face to all you in the audience. But I think one of the themes of everything you just said is that you're directly affecting people's lives, right?
Absolutely.
Or getting people new driver's licenses and all that. And I think that positions like JPs are one of the ones that are most commonly underappreciated. So, and like you said, judges are elected in Texas and in a lot of other states. And so when you go to the ballot box on election day and you look at the JP spot or another slot like that, you're really making a decision about who's going to directly affect people's everyday lives, maybe your everyday life. And so, can you tell me a little bit about how you think that things are different if you're JP versus if a conservative is, or whoever you ran against is JP?
It's going to come down to really reviewing what the person's going to, what you think that judge is going to be more like on the compassionate side, the understanding side, how in touch with reality they are. Because when I start thinking about those three qualities, it's easy for a judge to sit on the bench and then kind of forget how things used to be, how uncomfortable and how difficult it used to be. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Before I was a judge, if somebody had asked me to go into court and handle a ticket, I was going to be all kinds of nervous because it's hard to learn how these processes work. So what happens is when they do come in here, I try to tear down some of those barriers. A lot of times I can see the look on their face change when they see somebody my age go and take the bench, as opposed to what we all imagine when you think of what a judge would typically look like. Um, so when it comes down to electing your officials, and the duties they're going to do, think about how well their personalities are going to fit it, how well they might listen to people, how much they're going to care, and how much they're going to try. Um, because my opinion, compared to another judge, there was an exercise we did at actual judge school where they gave us a case scenario, and everybody would just periodically raise their hands,
Mm-hmm.
give their. Everybody had different ideas of what should be granted, what should be denied. But what it comes down to is, are they going to do what's in the best interest of the public? If somebody wants to plead indigency because they can't afford a ticket, are they going to is a conservative judge going to be more likely to say, oh no, they did this crime, they pled guilty, they need to pay this ticket, or they're going to listen and truly listen to their indigent plea to see if they can afford this ticket, or see if they can do other means like community service, or even just saying, you know what, I think the best example I've seen is there was a person that lived um, in a rural community outside of Denton County, but they had a ticket here in
Mm-hmm.
my court. He wanted to do community service. Okay, and you start thinking about it. Oh, sure, I'll absolutely let you do community service. But I decided to have a conversation with him and ask him how is he going to complete these things. I found out he doesn't have a car. Found out he lived on a county road where there's no bus service. I
Mm-hmm.
looked up 501c3 charities around him. There weren't very many. I looked at him and I said, I think you doing even 10 hours community service is going to be a hardship because that's not going to be easy for you to walk 5 miles to get to town anyways. We're just going to call it done. Forgive the fees.
Mm-hmm.
Drive your 60 miles back to the country because there's no way you're going to complete this task.
That
Um,
was something you were able to do all in court, look all
yeah,
the stuff up and make that decision?
not really look at not well. Yeah, I actually did look up a couple things. But yeah, that was all in one court hearing. And my biggest dream is more people actually fill out those forms, read those forms carefully, because
Mm-hmm.
most people will just own up and say, you know what, I did it. I'm going to plead no contest, guilty. And then in their minds, they say, okay, it's a $400 ticket. I want to be able to pay this because it's something I did. And so they'll select payment plan. When things happens, they can't keep up with the payment plan. And so then we have to go seek out more warrants to get them to come back and tell us why they didn't do the payment plan. People get scared and don't want to show up.
Mm-hmm.
All because, I mean, we're all proud for different reasons. but they're reluctant to fill out that indigency form, mark that indigency form, and have a quick hearing. And
Yeah,
those hearings are not positive.
I think that's one of the issues with criminal justice in this country, is that very often there's a poverty penalty. You see the same thing with cash bail, where people are in jail, probably losing their jobs because they're not showing up to work because they can't afford to pay the however many hundreds of thousands of dollars their bail is at that moment. Even if it's just a few $100s for a lot of people, that's a big deal. I remember there was a lot of headlines last year when a poll came out that was saying that somewhere around 40 or 50% of Americans couldn't afford an unexpected $400 expense.
Right.
And so, while, yeah, I mean, it's exactly like you said that a lot of judges might be, maybe they've for a long time been making good money. They've been in public life already. They're older, more financially stable. They own their home and have their family all set up, or maybe they were never in financial hardships and they don't realize how hard that can be for some people. So I wish that people would realize a lot more often how important positions like that are, because I mean, you're making these decisions, and sometimes, I mean, I've been guilty of this too. When you go into the ballot box on election day, and you're like, "All right, I know who I'm going to vote for president, for Congress, for Senate," but then you get down to especially the nonpartisan races at the bottom, where you're like, "Oh, best person here. Maybe I've seen a sign for them, maybe."
Right.
But definitely, you can find places online, everybody, where you can go and look up who these people running at every level, everything on your ballot is, and you can Google their names, find out what they stand for, look at their social medias, and we'll get into some more of that later. But this election's coming up quickly. It's 41 days away now, and you should definitely be looking into that. Also, on a side note, make sure your voter registration is still valid. You're running out of time for that, and early voting starting in some places, so definitely do that. One of the things you talked about, Chris, was evictions. And you told me before that that's one of the biggest things that you deal with. So, because of the economic crisis that's been happening because of COVID-19, have you seen an uptick in evictions in the past few months or in the past few weeks even? And the CDC issued a moratorium on evictions, and has that been having the effect that you think was intended?
So the CDC moratorium and their declaration has had a very strong effect very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you just a brief breakdown of just
Mm-hmm.
to start off with eviction numbers pre-COVID, when COVID hit to now. Um, Before COVID, we were expecting obviously more cases than we've ever seen in any given year. On an average month, it wouldn't be unusual to have 400 eviction cases filed just in this part of the county. Last year, we were a little over 2,400 evictions filed. At the rate that we were going this year, we would have had over 3,000 cases filed in this court alone.
To give some people to give some perspective, how many people are in your jurisdiction, around about?
The only number I can think of is the voting population. I think it was 76,000 registered voters. Obviously, not everybody's a registered voter, so that number is going to be a lot higher. There's been a tremendous amount of growth that I'm interested to see what the new numbers are going to be after the census. But it's got to be at least over 120,000 in this corner. And then
So 120,000 people, and you've had several thousand evictions this year. So at least a few percent of the total population, which if you extrapolate that to the whole country, you're talking about millions and millions of people.
in a regular given year, yes. But when COVID hit, the state did their own moratorium in the beginning. It lasted about 3 months, and so for those 3 months, we had no cases at all.
Mm-hmm.
Then CARES Act went into effect, and it said any apartment complex or really any residential unit that was covered under the CARES Act, which means their loan that they used to purchase that dwelling was backed by a federal mortgage. They now had an eviction moratorium they had to follow. So that shut down a ton of evictions because they couldn't file on people. When that expired, the apartments still couldn't file a suit until after they give 30-day notice to vacate to those that had not paid rent. And then after that 30-day notice expires, that's when they could file in court. Um, so our numbers for eviction cases have just been lower than anybody has ever expected. Even when we had to start back up and processing the cases that we paused that were filed pre-COVID, most of those cases they were 3-4 months old at that point. They were dismissed by the plaintiffs because they'd already figured it out, outside of court.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then Denton County handled things a little differently than some other counties. You'll see that um, Dallas County JPs, I believe one out of the San Marcos area, they filed their own eviction moratorium saying this JP court is not moving forward on them. They're freezing them until the order was lifted. Um, I didn't do that here in Denton County. Like I had the moratorium written up, ready to go, but we never saw that spike or that increase in cases. A big part of it was the CARES Act gave Denton County funding because they give every county funding for assistance.
Mm-hmm.
The Denton County Commissioner Court then set aside a ton of grants to send to nonprofits. Those nonprofits had the structure to not only reach people, but process applications from people that could not afford to pay rent due to COVID reasons. And then those nonprofits turned around and paid apartment complexes the pure rent only because they weren't paying late fees, utilities, and stuff like that. But the combined between the CARES Act, all the grants that Denton County gave, it sent our eviction numbers down to just very few. On a given day, I might be able to handle 60, 70 cases in the morning. I was getting maybe 1 or 2 a week in court. So there was a huge drop there. But then adding to that, the governor extended some powers saying that we could stretch deadlines, modify deadlines as needed. And that was a very powerful tool to combine it because what would happen is you actually would have somebody come to court, swear them in, go through the process, and then I would ask them, are you aware of these different resources that are available to help you pay rent? Because that's the only reason you're here is because it's COVID reasons. The defendants would almost always say, no, I didn't know that Denton County had allocated funds for this. Many times apartment complexes, they knew a little bit about it, but they didn't know the full list of it. And even somebody who just rents out their first home to somebody, they had no way of knowing either. So more often than not, that first court setting, I was talking to both parties, giving them the resources of, hey, this is how you can get funds moving because, they didn't want to lose their home. The person that owned it or the company that owned it, they definitely wanted to receive funds. And then I would rely on that governor's order allowing me to modify deadline dates. And I would just continue the case, reset it for 1 or 2 weeks forward to give them time to actually go out, see if those funds could be obtained. And that just moved things along because I was teaching people, hey, there's a better way out of this. Two, it was helping avoid evictions because they realized, oh, bills could still be paid through these funds. In the most unusual scenario, one woman was $17,000 behind on rent. It was a pretty big home. She had a pretty big family, so of course that rent amount builds up really quickly. That entire thing was covered by the grant money. Like I, in my wildest days, would have never thought I would hear of $17,000 of rent assistance being possible. But that shot our numbers down to just barely any eviction cases at all. And then the latest with the CDC eviction moratorium, it's very, very wide net, meaning any eviction that's going down at any point in time, the defendant can hand in that declaration to the landlords or the court, and it freezes it until the end of the year. So even if the constable's knocking on the door saying you've been evicted, this is us telling you you have 24 hours to remove your items from the premises, or we will remove you from the premises. They can hand them that paper. Constables then deliver it to the court, and it's abated through the end of the year. And so that CDC declaration is very important, very powerful, but they have to read over it, swear to it at the risk of perjury if they're lying on it. If they fit that criteria, their case is abated. We've already seen a few of those come through. There was one organization in Denton that the first weekend that went into effect knocked on 98% of doors that were facing eviction in the county. That's a huge ground game, considering how big the county is and how many cases they can knock on.
That's really reassuring because a few weeks ago we were hearing before eviction moratorium was put in place, we were hearing that 30, 40 million people could be evicted. So that's really reassuring to hear. You talked about money from the CARES Act that was allocated to Denton County, but the CARES Act has expired now, so there's no new money coming in at least.
But
Are you still working off of the money that you got originally, or have you been having to find money from some other source?
so that's one part of the loop that I don't know about, because it's not that our court ever got the money. It's all those other nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they don't send us reports. We don't ask for reports because that's not something my office is going to be able to really communicate with. That's like overstepping our boundaries to say, hey, how much money y'all got over there?
Okay.
But the last rumor that I heard was that they had enough funds to last through December, um, which the timeline sort of makes sense. But my gut instinct tells me that they're going to run out of money a little bit sooner than that. So all these moratoriums, all these assistance is kind of kicking the can at least until the beginning of next year. And then who knows if anybody else is going to be able to provide either more financial assistance to people in need, or if there's going to be more moratoriums, or if everybody's all out of options and it just starts getting forced to have all these cases move forward.
Well, hopefully they can get something sorted out in Congress to provide some more stimulus. I know, God knows, they've been working on it for a while. Um, I've heard some stories in the news about landlords that essentially kind of just ignore the eviction moratorium. Has that been an issue that you've ever experienced since it was put in place?
If they're ignoring that moratorium, they're probably ignoring the proper legal steps of filing it in court. I mean, I have no way of knowing if they're bullying people into either moving out on their own early, forcing them on extra fees. But people aren't in here lying on their paperwork, at least I hope not, saying that they haven't seen these declarations from tenants. All the hearings I had today, they were 100% honest about either they did things incorrectly in their filings or their tenants did turn in those declaration forms. Because the CARES Act, the CDC declaration, all of those have stipulations to where if a property or a person is lying on these forms, uh, they face severe penalties. I think the CARES Act one had $25,000 if it's an individual, $50,000 fine if it's for like a company that's doing it.
Uh-huh.
I do not remember the CDC numbers right now, but the numbers from them, the penalty was pretty stiff. I think it was even, I think closer to 100,000 in fines.
Oh, wow.
So people are paying attention to those.
Yeah. Well, that was all super reassuring. To be honest, that was not the answer I was expecting, but I'm glad to hear it. Getting into some of the raw politics of what you do. You, like I said in the beginning, you were the only Democrats in Denton County to win an election in 2018. So I was wondering if you could speak towards how that happened, why you were able to win when other Democrats weren't, and why other Democrats weren't able to win in the county.
I guess a little disclaimer. Obviously, I didn't have to campaign through a pandemic, so my strategy back then, if it was applied to now, it might not work.
Yeah.
It was nonstop knocking on doors, contacting voters, finding who our voters were, making sure they would actually show up to vote on election day, checking back in with them. It was a nonstop movement. In a typical day, I would set my alarm at 5 a.m. Before traffic was really flowing. I would get up, check campaign signs when I had campaign signs up, make sure that they didn't get tore down, go missing. I had a super small budget. I hardly got any donations. Most of it was a struggle. So I would actually relocate signs, shift them around my old precinct area. So it looks like we had more than we really had. Looked like we had 30, 40. I had 6. And then once 9 a.m., maybe 10 a.m. rolls around, that's when it's appropriate to start calling people because you don't want to wake them up too early. You don't want to call them on their commute to work. Worst case scenario, you call them at work and they can't take a call. So you would do calls until about 1 or probably 2 or 3 in the afternoon. Then I would go out knocking on doors, telling people, hey, there's an election. I'm running. More often than not, because people hadn't targeted Democrats in this area for so long. I was knocking on doors and people were saying, I've never seen anybody do this before. What are you doing? What is this about? And there's a lot of strategy going into it because you look at maps, you look at data. I actually had to change the way I would dress to go knock on doors because if I was dressed in a dress shirt, they wouldn't open a door. If it was 20 degrees outside and happened to be cold and rainy, I couldn't bundle up in a warm coat because they're not going to open the door for that. I had to dress in bright colored Hawaiian shirts. Or I guess I didn't have to. That was my choice to wear that, and it worked out well, so I kept doing it. I guess kind of like wearing a specific jersey and the stars win, you keep wearing that jersey. I kept wearing Hawaiian shirts, and people kept opening doors, and I kept having conversations. So it's all about personal engagement, getting out in front of the community every chance you can get. Um, and then at night, when it was too late to knock doors, run data, push data together, or you would go out to meetings because everybody was having meetings, forums, uh, social functions, which you still had to go out and make sure that everybody would see you at these places. And a big part of it that really works that Carrollton is most of JP6 is half of Carrollton. It operates like a small town, even though it's a pretty heavily populated city. So I would go out to these events. I would never tell them, "Oh, I'm Chris Lopez. I'm running for this." Um, I would just go out there as a person, an attendee, and just meet people. "Oh, I'm Chris Lopez," and then let them figure out down the line, weeks, months later, that he's actually running for something, but he's been around here a lot. That sticks more in their mind of I'm a politician shaking your hand, and here, it's obvious why I'm here.
So it's all about a person, not just yeah. You alluded at the beginning that a lot of that might not work so well in our current situation. Have you heard from anyone who is running this year about how they're adapting to the realities of campaigning during a pandemic?
It's all call time for the most part. They're calling voters, they're calling donors, calling volunteers to get more volunteers. I've seen a little bit of. I haven't seen any door knocking from our side, from the Democrat side, but they've been starting to do lit drops so that you get home, you see some literature on your door. But because of COVID and we're all trying to be safe, we're not trying to get anybody to open their door and have a face-to-face conversation. Because I wear a face mask every time I'm in public, but when I'm at home, I don't have any in my home. They're in the car. So if somebody knocks on my door, I'm probably not going to answer. So it's playing to your strategies, your strengths, and working all within those.
Outstanding. So we're about halfway done. So before we get into some more politics, let's play our game real quick. All right. So if you haven't watched our previous streams, everybody, what we do is about halfway through, we usually play a game. It's kind of like political trivia, and we try to theme it based on who we're talking to. So, Chris, you ran a down ballot race. So this game is going to be about down ballot races. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right. So, Chris, one of the most underrated offices in America is judges. Judges have incredible leeway to decide all kinds of things, ranging from people like you making decisions on evictions to state Supreme Courts dealing with death penalty cases, constitutionality. And like we alluded earlier, I think a lot of people don't even realize that most state judges are elected. How many states have their high court judges elected, Chris? How many do you think?
5.
Wow, this is really going to blow you out of the water then. This is really going to blow you away. 38 states out of 50 states elect their Supreme Court's justices, which, I don't know, maybe you are an elected judge, but what do you think of the idea of judges being elected in general?
I'm all for them being elected. I'm going to say that the only really odd thing is that in Texas, to be elected, you have to pick a party whenever you're doing this. And then the minute you get sworn in, you have to drop that party and be just straight down the middle, pretty cut and dry when you're on the bench. There's no politics on the bench, which is still odd because then I go out and I meet all these judges. Politics are never discussed, but ideas of how to run the court, those are discussed.
That's the issue that's in my head with elected judges, though, is that I don't know. I wonder how much politics actually does get dropped, especially when you get up to Supreme Courts and stuff, and how much existing biases or thoughts of what this is going to be good for my reelection are influencing your decisions. It's my only issue with the whole idea of it.
Our Texas Supreme Court has been really, really quick to act, and I've been surprised at how well they've been acting and how quickly they've been moving.
Yeah,
it's giving us direction on how to proceed in court and how to make sure we're following all these steps. Like it's It's been impressive. Like it does seem like that they just dropped the partisan politics to do their judge work.
That's that's another thing that's really reassuring to hear. So another important down ballot position is school boards and state boards of education. They make the curriculum that our students learn and a lot more. So Chris, roughly, how many school boards in the U.S. are having elections this year, do you think?
Percentage wise,
Number.
oh, I have no idea.
There are 2,797 school boards having elections this year, which is such a big number, including a lot of the 200 biggest school districts. So you're probably having elections for at least some of your school board members in your school district this year. And just to really point out how important that is, how many states still allow teaching creationism in school?
17.
13, very close. 13 states, which really speaks to how important school board elections are because, like I said, very often they do make the curriculum, especially states boards of education. And so, like we were saying earlier, that's definitely one you should look up ahead of time and see who those nonpartisan names at the bottom are.
Also, they're not the regular election cycles. That's the hardest thing to track is your municipals and your school boards. There's a special election right now that I forgot about.
When I was in high school, I used to do some work for my county's election administration on election days. But just on election days would still be a couple of times a year because there might be, a school board election in July or something like that. And then, those elections like that, there would be 300,000 people in the city and you'd get like 300 people voting.
Yep.
I feel like they should, how you get like Amber Alert text or flash flood warning text and stuff like that? I wonder if they should make, hey, there's an election coming up next week, warning public notice texts like that. That might be something that's nice.
That would be a pleasant surprise if something like that were to be passed, just increasing the turnout.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always on board for more transparent elections. Not everyone always is, though, unfortunately.
Right.
So, we talked a few weeks ago with Jennifer Skidonenko, one of the great Democrats running for the Texas House of Representatives, and you guys can find that stream in our live streams playlist if you haven't watched it yet. And we talked about how big it could be to flip the Texas state legislature, but that's not the only important flippable legislature. According to a list by the PAC Swing Left, how many state legislatures do you think are flippable this year?
22.
Well, now it's not going to sound like a lot at all. They list 10 states, so that's like Michigan, Georgia, stuff like that. But that's a lot of states. Yeah, that's millions and millions of people. And even in the states where it's not necessarily flippable, that we could turn it from one party's control to another, we could eat away at the margins there. So that's another reason why it's so important. And speaking of that, getting into our final question, if people want to support down ballot candidates like these, what's the best way that they can do that, Chris? By phone banking, by writing letters, or by donating?
If it's down ballot, donating. They have no funds to do anything else.
Well, I was going to say all three. Those
the last one brings the other
answer there. What's that now?
Donating will increase all the other two.
It will, yeah. If you can do all three, that's great too. But yeah, donating definitely helps. I would plug your re-election fund if you were up for re-election this year, but you're not. But we will get into some more other candidates later on. So getting back into some of the politics of it, Chris. Right before I looked at this, right before we started this, I looked at the 538 polling averages, and it was showing Joe Biden polling at 46.6% in Texas and to Donald Trump's 47.3%. And MJ Hagar and John Cornyn in some polls were as close as 2 points. So given that, it looks like this could be one of the closest elections in Texas that we've seen in a long, long time. And even if Joe Biden and MJ Hagar lose, then that could mean still picking up a lot more seats in Congress, seats in state legislatures like Skidanenko's seat, JP seats, mayors, school boards, all that kind of stuff. And you're an elected Democrat in Texas, so I was wondering if you could tell me from what you've seen if the Texas Democratic Party is ready for November.
From the candidate side, you never feel ready. You never feel anybody's ready for it. When the night that I was elected, I was going in with the data that we had ran that I was 3% behind off the early voting. Early voting numbers came in and I was ahead 1.5, and I was like, oh, I still don't think I did enough. So I can never believe that we've done enough and that we're ready for November, because there's always something that we wish we'd done a little bit more or a little bit better. But looking at the numbers of how the statewide is so close of a race, Denton County was just recently ranked a toss-up county, which is incredibly huge because we've been solid red for so long. We have a write-in candidate for sheriff that just joined in just a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. Time is hard to judge at this point. That person has been working their tail off in the short amount of time to overcome the ground game of a writing candidate and what they can do. So that is going to be a great race to watch. I think even as a writing candidate, it's winnable. But then just seeing what the data is going to show after election for a writing candidate, it's going to tell us so much more about Denton County. And then here, we didn't even get enough people on the ballot. Next door at the constable's office, he shares the exact same boundaries that I do. So that means that's a blue seat. Nobody ran. So he's running unopposed. He gets another term. So got to watch
right after you had just won that election.
Right. After winning that one, you think, oh, that person's out. No, nobody ran. It's building up confidence around the people around you to let them know, hey, this is doable. If you had asked 20-year-old me if being a justice of the peace elected in Denton County was a possibility in my future, I would have been like, no way, that doesn't make any sense. And then show people the data. It can all be possible. It can all be done.
Makes me think of in the 2019 Virginia elections, there was a candidate for the state senate in Virginia who forgot to file his paperwork in time and had to run as a write-in candidate. But they got enough money behind him that he was a Republican, but they got enough money behind him that he still won that election. 1,000 street signs saying, write in this person's name. That's a challenge of that. People have to remember your name. They can't just look and see the little R, the little D. They have to remember who you are. And
you get a list of writing candidates. So as long as that they filed their paperwork to be a writing candidate, their name is going to be on the list as an option to write in.
Oh, really?
The person running for sheriff has a very unique name that most people struggle with. It's Freya Odin's daughter.
I wonder if you misspell it, if it still counts.
It does still count. As long as it's in the ballpark and they can intentionally tell who you were trying to write in, it counts.
Well, that's good to know.
At least that's the rule.
Yeah. So a lot of people always talk about winning the suburbs, right? So Democrats always win the cities and Republicans always win the rural areas, but the suburbs are the real battleground. They can switch back and forth. And back in when Beto was running in Texas, this year with Joe Biden, people are always talking about you've got to win the suburbs. You've got to win the suburbs. And Denton County, your county, I think could arguably be called a suburb. And you won in it. So can you talk about some of the challenges to winning suburban voters, what you think is necessary to win suburban voters, and what you've been hearing from people in your county?
I think campaigning in a suburb is just going to be, without a doubt, the easiest way for time management.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to run in the northern part of Denton County, Precinct 5, it spans the entire northern half. If I want to hit 5 homes, it might take me an hour to get in between each one of them, going down each county road. Where being in the suburb, I could have knocked on 5 doors in the span of 5 minutes. So that ground game really comes into play. You start seeing, we can pull campaign data. And for example, I could see which precincts had the most voters that were likely Dem. Of course, I'm hitting those neighborhoods. If there's a couple precincts that were strong Republican, and without a doubt, there was no way I was going to win those precincts. I didn't spend as much time there because those homes were farther apart, and on foot, it would take so much more longer to reach 10 voters in this neighborhood as opposed to 10 voters in another neighborhood. So it comes down to structuring your campaign to time management and efficiency to get the most people reached. And then when you're running a campaign at the same time as somebody like Beto, he made it easier for me because I would look at a yard sign. Everybody loved Beto yard signs. I'm like, hey, they're probably them, and if they're not, they're at least open to listening to people. And so I would knock on the door, structure my comments to them, just to be reassuring and introducing them who I am, trying to avoid saying, "Oh, I'm a Democrat. This is what we're doing." Tell them what the policies were. Tell them what I'm trying to accomplish as somebody running for office, and when you have a real conversation like that, that is the entire key to making people listen, show up, and vote. And then because we could pull voter data, and if they voted, they would get removed, and saying, okay, we don't have to contact them anymore. There was a lot of Beto homes that had not voted during early voting that had to go knock on the door and remind them, hey, this is your last chance. Go now.
Is there anything that you've been hearing from people in your neighborhood or in your county about what they want out of a candidate this year that you think could be useful to other candidates?
It's going to be transparency. Through their actions in the past, through what their stated ideas in the past, did it match up with their actions? Can you see that integrity in their everyday aspects? It's easy to see another candidate that only wants to talk to their voters, because if they introduce themselves to you, they find out you're not in their voting area, they may immediately just end the conversation and walk away. I've had that happen to me by people plenty of times when they realized I didn't live in Dallas County. Never treat anybody that way. Like if you're having a conversation with one person, you're having a conversation with that person. It's okay to pause and greet somebody really quickly, but got to stay on track and treat everybody that's going to be an equal. And that's comes down to seeing that your candidate is an authentic person.
Well, that seems like the idea that someone would do that. Well, it's so rude, first of all, but when you're running in a local office, that person might know people who live in your precinct or your district. That just seems like bad strategy to me.
It is. And although I couldn't vote for that person in the election, we were part of the same organization that she needed a vote from me just to be endorsed by that organization. I was a hard person to vote for. I mean, there was another great candidate there, so that other great candidate got my vote, and that other candidate ended up with the nomination from that group. All because she snubbed somebody in a different county, then it came back to bite her just for that reason.
Well, that's a lesson about being polite to people. If there's nothing else you take away from this stream, you can probably take that away. I was just hearing some comments the other day about the town hall debate that Donald Trump did the other day, and they were comparing it to his press conferences, and they were saying, I mean, I think the big thing is that he can't yell at the voters. He can yell at the reporters all he wants, but he has to be polite, or try to be polite at least, when he's doing a town hall. But I mean, yeah, if he can do it, then you can do it, right? So,
right.
Come on now, people. So moving on, shifting a little bit, another one of the things that you deal with a lot is that you marry people. And that was a big issue in your election because not everyone's always okay with marrying people. So can you tell us a little bit about why that was an issue in your election?
Oh, sure. So the basis of a JP is we can perform wedding ceremonies if we choose to. If we choose to perform a wedding ceremony for one group, we have to do it for all the groups. So when Texas did say that same-sex couples could go and get marriage licenses, if that's when the judge would say, okay, I'm still going to perform these ceremonies for everyone. Or if they were just so much against it, they could say no more wedding ceremonies for anybody. Previous judge did not do wedding ceremonies. I don't know exactly what his choice and reasoning was in that, but he was denying himself the most fun part and the most fun aspect of this position. You meet a couple, spend a few minutes with them, and it doesn't take long to get married at a JP office, but you're making their day special. You're seeing the joy on their face. They're in a great mood. They put me in a better mood. There's really no such thing as a negative experience, at least from the judge aspect of performing wedding ceremonies. And then the most strange thing is that you have I see this look of relief on same-sex couples more often than heterosexual couples. There's a little, when they come into the office with their paperwork, booking their appointment, you can see the doubt in their eyes that it's going to happen. Like they're almost expecting to be denied at every turn. Um, and then I meet them. I go through, just a little breakdown of what to expect in a wedding ceremony, what names they want to use, because people change their names over time. They were, given this name by their parents. They never used it, didn't feel comfortable with it, but now they go by Bo, maybe instead of whatever their birth name was. When I ask them that and they say, "Oh, can you use this name?" You just see something click in their eyes of, "Oh, this is going to be awesome." And then at the end of the ceremony, you can see so much passion in their eyes because they're in disbelief that it's still happening. That it's just the most tremendous emotion, just pouring through people at these things. So I don't know why anybody would ever say I'm not going to do weddings when that's just the best part of the job.
That's awesome. What's the other option if your JP doesn't do weddings?
Any other judge in the county can do it. So
Okay.
for the most part, most counties have a lot of judges. There's usually going to be a whole lot more options than just the one or two JPs that a county might have. Denton County has 6 JPs. We all do things a little bit differently. One JP right now is only doing weddings through Zoom. I'm doing a combination of Zoom as an option or in-person weddings. I haven't done a Zoom wedding in months because it just not that people aren't interested in it. But then there's also they can go to their clergy, other people that are ordained. Um, there's proper paperwork for it all, and it all goes back to the county clerk for recording. So there's still checks to make sure it was done by a person that's qualified. But there's other options, and people will find them out if they're desperate enough. But I think the big thing is if the cliche thing is that your JP does wedding ceremonies, then you go there and you're disappointed because they don't. That elected official might not be doing their best to represent you in your community. So definitely that was a strong point to make sure we're offering services that we're supposed to offer or believed to have offer.
That's awesome. We're getting close to the end, but as we wrap up, you're not up for election, but I was wondering if you wanted to shout out a few candidates who are. You presumably know some candidates in the area in Texas that people could look up, consider if they want to support their races, and I was hoping you might give out a few names.
I'm not allowed to endorse anybody as a judge. Can't do that
Yeah.
one. But what I will do is I'm going to give you a couple different races to watch because you're going to see some. It's kind of like sports. This is going to be some incredible changes if these people get elected, and it's going to be incredible as far as they're flipping seats for the first time since the seat's been there. So Congressional District 24, Candace Valenzuela. She used to be on the school board. She's a close friend of mine that I've gotten to know over the past few years. Um, the way she's working, as hard as she's working, she's probably going to flip that congressional district for the first time since it was created. Before her, it was held by the same Republican who won it the first time it was created. He recently has decided to retire, and so it's an open seat. That's looking to be the strongest flip, at least in our little Denton County area. But then Shadi Zatoun, as far as candidates go, he's speaking about things that a lot of other candidates typically don't speak about. He's being blunt about it. He's holding town halls. He's trying to get in front of as many people as he can. He's having interesting people on his Facebook page and joining on his town halls, and they're all very informative. I don't know his campaign strategy in and out, but it seems like it's there to teach people about things. That's going to be a fun one to continue watching through November because there's no end of how much he can teach people. And when you go up to the northern part of Denton, Angela Brewer, her seat almost flipped, or the seat she's running for is a House district, almost flipped last cycle. And so she's got a really strong chance of winning as well. And that race is getting pretty heated. So those are going to be some entertaining races to watch, at least in the North Texas area.
Awesome. I've definitely heard about a few of those before. Before we get finished, I think we've got a couple questions in the chat, so let me go take a look at those. So, David Beasley asks, is the my BIPOC stand, does that stand for, I can't remember what that acronym stands for. Is it Black, Indigenous, People of Color? Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah. Is the BIPOC makeup of the court officials in your county representative of the cultural background of your constituents? He wonders.
No, that's not balanced.
No, it's do you think it's more white on the bench?
It's heavily Caucasian on the bench.
Okay. I'm sure that's probably representative of a lot of different elected officials throughout this country. If you look at the Senate, for instance, there's 3 black senators right now, so 3% of the Senate and 13% of people in the United States are black, I believe. But I think that's a common thing in this country. Let's see if there are any other questions here. Some issues with my microphone earlier in the stream. Apparently, it's fixed now, I guess. Um, Someone asks about if judges are appointed, is there still the possibility of a party bias, which we got into a little bit earlier? And you were saying you don't think that you've seen much party bias in the bench at all, right?
In appointed ones, it's going to be a lot more biased, or at least the opportunity for them to be biased. But it's in the elected ones, that's when it seems to be they're dropping the politics once they're on the bench. Now, that's a blanket statement. That's not going to be true for every judge, just because there's so many judges in the state. But there's a lot more research because you start looking into municipal judges; those aren't elected; those are all appointed. And so that's where it's hard to check because it's hard to figure out who those judges are. It's hard to make sure that they're presiding properly, doing all their court trainings and their updates, um, following OCA, which is Office of Court Administration's guidelines. Every state has some form or version of it. And what they do is if somebody reports that I did something unethical from the bench or something that's not legally appropriate from the bench, they go and they research they may interview me. They may just interview the participants, and they see if there was something that I did that wasn't legal. And then at that point, they could find me, they could order me to do more judge training, they could order me removed from office if it's heinous enough. And those reports are public record. If you go search OCA Texas Office of Court Administration, you can go through and see all the reprimands that they've handed out over the past few years. And there's been a ton recently because we're supposed to be doing open courts on Zoom or Zoom and YouTube. And if they're not compliant with that one, they could get reprimanded if they're holding court either in person when we're not supposed to hold it in person, or if they're not adhering to open policies.
Great. Well, I think that was all the questions I had for you today. Is there anything else you want to address before we wrap up, Chris?
Oh, I think we're all good.
Great. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Thank you, Chris, for joining us. Go ahead and give the stream a like if you haven't already. Next week, we're going to have Matt Caffrey from Swing Left on, and also be sure to tune in for our debate live stream and fact check Tuesday at we're probably going to start about 30 minutes before the debate. We're going to have 3 other content creators in there with me. Links in the description. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
All right, bye. This in-stream button isn't working.